And welcome to the political panel. We're talking about the New Brunswick budget, a fiscal plan New Brunswickers were waiting for because they wanted to see what the Alward government was going to do to tackle the increasing debt and deficit. As it turned out, some of the key measures were an increase in gasoline and cigarette taxes, some funding cuts for various groups, including the Advisory Council on the Status of Women, and an increase in tuition fees for university students. Joining me now, New Brunswick's Finance Minister Blaine Higgs and the Leader of the Opposition, Victor Boudreau. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Mr. Higgs, what can you point to in this budget that says this is innovative, this is imaginative thinking, and this is a new way of doing business?
Well, certainly the build-up to this particular budget with the consultation process would be unprecedented in the history of putting a budget package together. The submissions that we had, the engagement we had from the public, that helped direct us to where we wanted to evaluate, not only in the initial budget, but in budgets to come, because this is an ongoing process. So that set the stage to help us start changing of where we should focus. The unprecedented involvement allowed us to really realize that people are engaged. They want the direction turned around. So having a budget now that has actually, based on the previous budget forecast, it's actually held the line on spending, and based on the current budget projections for this current fiscal year, we've actually seen a reduction. Pretty significant change in direction.
Okay, so you're saying the consultation process would be the innovative part of it, the imaginative thinking part of it. When you did the consultation process, did people say things like cut the Advisory Council on the Status of Women, raise student tuitions, raise gas taxes?
They said we should look at areas of duplication. We should look at consolidation. We should create opportunities to improve efficiencies, hold people accountable for what we spend. It wasn't a case of just spending more in different departments or different institutions. It was a case of everybody being part of doing with what they have or doing a little more with what they have. And so this was the first exercise to go down that road.
Mr. Boudreau, you've been involved in this budgetary exercise 3 times, I believe.
Yes.
Did the government show imagination? Did it show innovative thinking?
Well, I'd have to say no, Terry. I will give the minister points in terms of the pre-budget consultation. It was pretty extensive, and I will give him points for that. But when you look at the outcome, we expected something much more, I think, drastic in terms of a change in approach or change in vision. Both the minister and the premier for many months were touring the province saying, we're basically going to turn New Brunswick upside down, and I don't quite think that's what happened with the budget that was tabled. It's about making choices, and when they talk about wanting to reduce overlap and duplication, I think they could have done away with a few political advisors in the Premier's office and kept the Advisory Council for the Status of Women. There's only one Advisory Council. There's no duplication there. It's been in place since 1977, representing the interests of women in New Brunswick. And I think it's very unfortunate to see something like that being taken away.
Mr. Higgs, your response to that?
Well, certainly that on the Advisory Council, that is folding. Actually, the people are moving into the Women's Issues branch and under the same minister. So those activities will continue, only in a consolidated effort. So I see it as a consolidation to continue the priorities as they have existed and will continue to exist. So we're moving. We're not moving away from a program. We're consolidating to enhance and make it a more focused program.
You're getting a lot of pushback on that. When you were anticipating doing that, when you were going through the deliberation process, did anybody raise the point that this is a lightning rod? We're going to get a lot of pushback on this.
Well, I guess if we could say that. However, the results will be in how it is moved forward in the outcome of the issues that were currently on the table within that council and moving it forward where it'll be in the new council. The results will show for itself. But lightning rods are going to exist no matter where you focus your attention, no matter what efficiencies we try to drive, there will be lightning rods. This budget we put together is one of a balanced approach. We got that message loud and clear. We didn't want it all to be reductions. We wanted to see a blend of increases in revenue and reduction in spending. And that is what we moved forward on.
What about Mr. Boudreau's point? And I'll come to you in a second, Mr. Boudreau, but I just wanted to see you address the point that he just raised, that some of the money you're spending on patronage appointments, or what his party is calling patronage appointments, with that money you could have funded the Advisory Council on the Status of Women for years down the road.
So we have invested in positions that will bring strategic change to this government. Looking at the budget, if you looked at, certainly we were asked to review the pension program and come up with a recommendation of what would be acceptable to the MLAs. We've done that. We have a new report now that reflects more a reasonable approach to pensions.
But you're not going to address that question about the patronage, are you? Okay.
We've indicated in the budget that we're going to reduce the number of senior deputy ministers and ADMs by 10%. Now, this all flows from a cabinet reduction, which was initiated from the very beginning of our mandate. And as we move through the system, you're going to see that everywhere that it makes sense to improve efficiencies and to right-size government in a meaningful and a constructive manner.
Mr. Boudreau.
Well, first of all, to come back to the Advisory Council, you cannot expect, and I have the utmost respect for the staff that work there and that are going to be transferred into the women's branch at Executive Council, but you cannot expect a civil servant to be able to fulfill the same role and the same mandate that the staff of the Advisory Council has fulfilled. A civil servant isn't going to come out and question the decision of a minister or a policy direction of government. That's why it needs to be arm's length. It needs to be independent from government. And that's what's very important. And, to touch on the patronage issue, they campaigned on doing things differently. The Premier was very clear that he was going to do things differently. He was going to hold competitions. He was going to find the most qualified person available. And he did just the opposite. And the 10% reduction, just in the new hires that they've done in the last 5 months would cover the 10% and more. The Premier has surrounded himself by more political deputies and ADMs than any Premier has in history.
Is that a fact?
The numbers are there. You just have to look at, compared to what our government had in place and what this government has in place between the Premier's office and the Executive Council office, which is, the Cabinet Secretariat. There are more deputy ministers. There's 5 there now where we had 3 before. There's 3 or 4 ADMs there where we didn't have any before. So, there's your 10% right there simply by, not hiring everybody that has a Tory membership card.
Were you anticipating more cuts? Were you expecting something more drastic than what we ended up with?
What we were really hoping to see, Terry, was a bigger focus on the economy, on growing the economy. We said all along that there's 3 approaches that need to be taken. You need to look at revenue, you need to look at expenses, but you need to grow the pie. You've got to set targets for job creation, for investment attraction. We had targets. Sometimes we met them, sometimes we didn't, but we always had targets. And we grew the number of jobs, we grew our population, and we grew our economic or the size of our economy. But we're not seeing any targets whatsoever from this government. Invest New Brunswick was supposed to be the savior, and there's not even a line item in the budget for Invest New Brunswick.
Okay, Mr. Higgs, I'd like to hear your response to that.
Well, firstly, on targets, anyone can throw out targets that are pulling numbers out of the air. We've seen lots of that in the past. We could go through each one of them, and we could easily identify the numbers that have succeeded and the numbers that haven't. And I assure you, the numbers that haven't are much larger than the ones that have. On job creation, on economic development, on investment in businesses, the track record certainly would show for itself. So we're not going to produce numbers for the sake of producing numbers. When we put commitments forward and we put our plan forward as we move from this budget to the next budget, it'll be as a result of very calculated investigation into what we're capable of doing, where the opportunities lie, and where we can move forward in a very positive and meaningful way.
Go ahead.
But just if I may, Mr. Minister, you've worked for the Irvings all your life. You've worked in private sector, and I'm sure there's not a day that goes by or a week that goes by that you weren't measuring yourself against certain targets. Everybody in the private sector sets targets for themselves. That's how they know whether or not they're achieving what they hope to achieve and what they've set out in terms of goals and guidelines. To have now 3 agencies responsible for economic development, Business New Brunswick, Invest New Brunswick, and the Regional Development Corporation, nobody has targets. So nobody knows what to shoot for, and nobody even knows what's going on at Invest New Brunswick. The CEO has been in place now for at least 3 months, and there's not even a line item in the budget. So you need to set targets, and sometimes you won't reach them, but at least you're giving those civil servants something to shoot for, and to encourage them to get up in the morning and go to work.
Okay.
So, firstly, on the Invest NB, Invest NB has been set up because we've had multiple complaints about who do you talk to in government to make things happen, who actually takes a project, an initiative from the initial contact through all the departments, because they get lost and it takes months to make anything happen. So that's why Invest NB is created. It folds into Business New Brunswick, so it's part of the budget. It's not a new budget. It's not a new entity. We've seen a number of those new entities that have been created, and with a great purpose in mind, but no results at the end of the day, no real business plan to execute. Going back to targets, I doubt that there's been a person that has talked more about accountability in government and targets of performance moving forward than I have in the last 5 months.
But you haven't said
it is the biggest thing that I have seen missing in government. Now, you can't make up targets. You create targets by understanding where do you want to arrive, what's your capability of achieving, and what outcomes do you hope to achieve from this. What I have been so amazed at is that accountability, measurement of performance doesn't exist. Measurement against any target doesn't exist. So I am not prepared to throw out information that I can't substantiate and deliver on.
Let me ask you this then. Okay, looking at the budget that you just presented this week, what is there that would say to New Brunswickers that the all-word government is really concerned about job creation and economic stimulation? What have you done, what have you presented to the people of New Brunswick that would lead them to believe that you really are focused on job creation?
All right. Well, certainly in the what we aren't focused on is handing out more money without any return on investment. So that has proven to be a very poor program, very unsuccessful, and so we aren't in that position, and we don't intend to be. The area we are focused on is holding the line on corporate tax. So we're competitive with the rest of Canada. A recommendation by the federal government at 10%. We will hold that because it's a fair thing to corporations. It's a fair thing to the citizens of this province. We've said we would reduce the actual small business tax rate to make small businesses more effective. And we've started the process with the first reduction as part of our overall 5 to 2.5. We are working very closely with the business community because they want us to be supportive on real projects. They don't want us to be handing money out without any real business case that justifies it. Now, I know there's lots of consideration, much different than I would have been used to in the private sector, on what makes solid business sense and what makes economic and regional sense. So we all have to be sensitive to that. But I think for the first time, businesses are seeing a renewed focus on how we spend taxpayers' dollars so that the money that's invested in this province is not being wasted by the government in inefficient delivery of service.
1 second, because I think what you just said, what you just told us, was that you have come to the realization that the decisions about business investment also have to include considerations that are political.
They have to consider regional economic situations.
So that could result hypothetically in an ACCON situation.
Well, I mean, there really wasn't a business case there, and I think that we all have got to that space at this point in time. But if you look at what we're promoting in the Northern Fund for the Northern Job Creation Fund and the Miramichi Fund, that region has been hit really hard by the downturn in the forestry industry. So we are focused in investing money in that region. So when I speak of regional issues, that is a region that needs help.
Okay, Mr. Boudreau.
Well, a couple of things there, Terry, that were touched on. Again, they talk about wanting to reduce overlap and duplication in terms of economic development. So what do? They add a third agency into the mix. I don't see how that is necessarily going to reduce duplication and overlap. They haven't given that agency any targets. They haven't given it a mandate. They haven't given it a budget. when we look at the taxation decisions that were taken with this budget, we've been reviewing replies from the opposition from when we were in government. And when we tabled the plan for lower taxes in New Brunswick, Premier Allward, who was then the leader of the opposition, was saying that it wasn't going far enough and it wasn't going fast enough because we needed to be competitive in a global market. Well, we still need to be competitive in a global market in 2011, but yet we seem to be wanting to take away some of that edge. By reducing the corporate income tax to 10%, we're going to be the same as every other province. What the plan for lower taxes was doing was giving us an edge over other provinces. Now we're going to be in the exact same category as every other province.
Okay, Mr. Higgs, what about that? Is that a legitimate?
Well, the plan that we saw before was obviously not working. We have a debt situation here that was unprecedented. When we are growing a deficit in the order of a projected $1 billion a year, we think we have a plan that's working. When we're paying $700 million of our tax dollars just to service a debt, we think our plan is working. When our unemployment rate actually has gone down year over year, and particularly last year, do we think that plan's working? That's why we turn direction. We have to be not only fiscally accountable, we have to be focused on where we're going to invest properly. Invest NB is that focus point for new businesses to have a direction through government.
But Mr. Boudreau raises the point that you've got three different letterheads there. You've got Invest New Brunswick, Business New Brunswick, and RDC. I mean, do we really need three different letterheads associated with job creation?
So we are folded in around Business New Brunswick, and within that budget, the focus point is with Invest NB, so that it actually is the counseling area to move business ideas through the system. What we had seen happening in the past is that, yes, you maybe go to RDC, or yes, you talk about a project, but then maybe it goes to environment, or then it goes to DNR, or there it goes to some other department, and they all get stalled along the way, and businesses come and go because we don't react quickly. So the plan is to try to create a focus point to move these items along, and certainly the appointment of Mr. McLeod in Investment NB, he comes with a track record in business.
But no competition. And, the more we go here, Terry, I mean, Robert McLeod's appointment was made in January at the State of the Province address. We're now, at the end of March. We still haven't seen any sign of anything. We don't know where he is, what he's doing. Has he hired staff? Is he building an office? It looks more and more like this was simply the Premier needed to find a job for a very loyal co-campaign manager of his campaign, because now you've got two deputy ministers at Business New Brunswick. You've got the one who was there before, and you've got Robert McLeod, who's there as Invest New Brunswick, which now we're being told is part of Business New Brunswick, where when the announcement was made, it was supposed to be a separate entity. Well, usually a separate entity has its own line item in the budget. It's not part of an existing department.
Point taken. Mr. Higgs, do you have a job creation target?
We don't. We're not going to throw out a number like 20,000 new jobs and then end up falling short or falling well short, or not even, or say, where did you come up with that?
Or surpassing it.
Well, it seems like a good number, so let's throw it out there. We want to have a steady growth in our economy.
What would be steady? Give me a number.
Well, I guess we'd like to move beyond the national average, and right now we're projecting a growth of like 1.5% to 2%, and that's so. Yeah, it would be great to exceed that and move beyond that. And there aren't any big projects on the horizon right now that you can point to and say that's going to really drive us forward. We know we can't save ourselves to prosperity. I mean, I've said that a number of times, but we do have to focus on working with what we have and making efficient use of that. It's interesting that we talk about investment NB at length just after delivery of a budget. I guess I've been getting, messages quite significantly, pro and con. You've gone too far, you haven't gone far enough. To me, that's a balanced budget. We were asked to do a balanced budget. We feel we've achieved that. We're changing the direction. The results will be measured. and the results will be reported. And I'm very optimistic because I see such a high level of engagement from all sectors that we are going to be more than successful.
What results do you think would indicate that this is a successful budget? I mean, you say you're waiting for results. What results, what statistics would you look at to say, yes, we've met our obligation, this is a successful budget?
Our obligations have only just started. I mean, our obligation is to deliver on a balanced budget through our mandate, and then have a plan going forward to pay down the debt. So we've just begun the process. But the very fact that rather than projecting year over year increasing deficits, we have projected half of the past increase of this year. That, to me, is a significant turn in direction.
Mr. Boudreau, Mr. Higgs is saying that some of the hard decisions will be coming later. What do you think he's referring to there?
Well, that's one thing. This budget has caused more questions than it's given answers. I mean, Minister Higgs made some pretty vague statements in his budget speech in regards to health care, in regards to education, in regards to senior care. Yesterday, again in QP, said that we probably built schools and hospitals that we didn't need. That tells me that they're looking at closing schools and hospitals. Why else would you make a comment like that unless you were looking at closing some? There needs to be, and I don't want to harp on the economic development side, but there does need to be focus and there needs to be targets, and the figures don't lie. I mean, Stats Canada will show that in our 4-year mandate, we created 15,000 jobs. No, it wasn't the target of 20,000 that we set for ourselves, but it was still 15,000 more than we had when we started. In the last 6 months, we've lost 12,000 full-time jobs in the province. That's based on Stats Canada. That's not the Liberal opposition making these numbers up. So it's important to set targets, but it's also important to make choices. When we were in government, we had we had made some decisions as well to rein in costs and to stop the growth of certain programs and certain expenditures, but they were obviously not politically popular decisions. But the government of the day, today, during the campaign, promised to reverse all those decisions because they were popular at the time. And so now they're reopening government garages, 22 government garages around the province, but yet that forces Minister Higgs to cut $12 million in low-income housing in the province of New Brunswick. Is that the proper choice to be making? These garages were closed. The Department of Transportation could still provide services. Everybody had been reaffected. So it wasn't causing any harm to anybody. But we have to reopen those 22 garages, and now we got to cut $12 million out of low-income housing for New Brunswick.
Is he making a fair connection there?
No, not in my view. We had commitments in our platform that certainly we are living up to. In relation to the job statistics, I mean, you just have to look at the unemployment rate. So we can say whatever numbers we want, but the unemployment rates were going up. If you look at the Stats Can and it was explained yesterday in QP in relation to Statistics Canada, and actually, if anyone thinks that things have changed in 6 months' time and uses that as a benchmark, I guess I'd have to really question how that would be credible, because the changes in Stats Can formula are very different, and you look out between this January of how it's being calculated and last year how it's being calculated, very different. So that can stand its own test when it's looked at in detail. If you look at the infrastructure and the challenges there, the challenge is we have a huge base of infrastructure in this province for a population of 753,000.
We're talking schools and hospitals now?
Yes.
Okay.
When you look at always using the word cuts, my preference and my belief is that we can do things so much better with what we have. And I use the reference, I made it in the budget speech about the number of general practitioners that we have here in the province. And it's an example of looking at the national average and say we have 1 per 1,000. Now, I don't know how they're all employed and if they're actually all practicing medicine, but when you look at that compared to the number of citizens, you can say, well, gee, if an average fee-for-service doctor has 2,000 or 2,500 patients, then it seems like we have enough. But maybe we're not utilizing their services properly.
Mr. Boudreau is very anxious to address that point.
Well, now this is one prime example right here of how we see that the PC party said anything to get elected, And now that they're in power, they've changed their tune completely.
That's not uncommon for political parties.
Premier Alward, when he was leader of the opposition, was promising every family a family doctor. Everybody was going to get a family doctor. We needed to recruit more doctors in the province of New Brunswick. Now, all of a sudden, there are plenty of doctors in the province of New Brunswick. You know, so what has changed in 5 months that all of a sudden, you know, there are plenty of doctors in the province? I know a lot of people that still don't have a family doctor.
I think Mr. Higgs is going to talk about deployment of resources.
Exactly. I am one of those that do not have a family doctor right now.
You don't have a family doctor?
I do not. Mine retired 4 months ago, a little longer. However, that is the culture. Just what Mr. Boudreau was talking about. That is the culture that has to change in government. We don't focus on what we have and how we can utilize our resources most effectively. We focus on just spending more. That exists in healthcare, it exists in education, it exists in social development. We just throw the money out and say, pay more and it'll get better. That isn't the culture I came from. The culture I came from, and you mentioned it, we measured targets, we measured efficiencies, and we were on a continuous improvement program. And that is what the government has to be on. And that is what's so different in government.
But you were campaigning next to Premier Alward saying we need more doctors in New Brunswick 6 months ago. Now you're saying we have enough doctors. I'm questioning. We have 1 per 1,000. If a fee-for-service doctor normally sees 2,500 patients, do the math. I mean, that would say we should have enough doctors. So I can say that in areas we've investigated, you can see that opportunity exists everywhere.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to stop it there. Thank you for a very reasonable discussion. That was a good one. Talking about budgets. Appreciate your time, gentlemen.
Thanks, Terry.